Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lena Petrova with a new episode of World Affairs in Context podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome back our good friend, Dr. Vladimir Brovkin. He's a former professor at Harvard and an author. Vlad runs a really great YouTube channel, Contemporary Issues in Politics with Dr. Brovkin. I watch his videos regularly, and I will go ahead and link his channel in the video description below. Please give him a follow. Vlad, welcome back to the program. It's so great to see you again.
Thank you so much. Always glad to be with you.
The Munich Security Conference, which took place from February the 13th to February the 15th, saw multipolarity becoming a key theme in geopolitics. The post-Cold War order has been what appears to be officially dismantled, and last year, J.D. Vance shocked everyone with his quiet, straightforward speech. This year, Marco Rubio's message was far more, I would say, sugar-coated. How do you interpret this general tone of the Munich Security Conference this year?
Yes, this is a great question. I would say that there are two major new elements in today's in Munich Security Conference compared to others, but also it's in a sense it's a new historical epoch, one could say. It's truly historic, and that is that uh, today the current Security Conference openly admitted that the paths between the United States and Europe are diverging. Moreover, the motto of the conference is, I believe, destruction or deconstruction, or they acknowledge openly, and von der Leyen in her speech acknowledges, many others acknowledges that the Atlantic Partnership is drifting apart. Now, there are many reasons for that, and we can discuss that, but Trumpism is just one manifestation of that. It didn't start with Trump, and it's not just Trump that is the major cause of this. It is a very complex, that's why I say historical process. The second one that struck me, the second aspect of the Munich Security Conference that is extraordinary, is that it is so belligerent in regard to Russia, incredibly belligerent. I mean, the not only Hillary Clinton, but she's a nobody, but Prime Minister of Denmark who wants to shoot at Russia, and Rutte with his plans and calling Russia a snail in her offensive, basically a paper tiger, and one can go on and on and on, basically demeaning Russia, disregarding its military posture, and threatening openly in ways that one could consider casus belli. For example, a joint production of drones by any international convention is a participation in war. Now, remember when the United States joined World War One, because a vessel where there were American civilians was sunk, legitimately sunk, because there was war material that was shipped to Britain, which was illegal, and the Germans found out and legally sank it because it had war material. Nevertheless, the United States found that is good enough reason to join the war, at least as an excuse. So joint production of drones that would shoot at Russian soldiers, and a plan by Mr. Fedorov, the war minister or defense minister in Ukraine, aiming to kill 50,000 Russian soldiers a month. That's essentially a declaration of war, as one of the observers called it. But the Europeans don't seem to be afraid of anything. They don't even call it an escalation. So these two things, divorce from the US and belligerence to Russia, is a new reality, which one would have to explain and then discuss, and what could be the outcome it by all the players. So these are the two major developments that I believe are extremely important.
What stood out to me was US Secretary of State Rubio's call on Europe to join Trump's vision of the New World Order. It's as if Rubio says, yes, there is a new world order, but it's still going to be, the United States is still going to maintain its primacy. And so it is clear that the United States is seeking to reestablish its hegemony in the world and far beyond the Western Hemisphere, while at the same time, it approaches Europe as not an equal partner, as Europeans would like to see that, but more of a junior partner in this transatlantic partnership. Some EU leaders, for instance, Austria's foreign minister, during the security conference in Munich, said that Europe now has to become more independent and assume more responsibility also in the security and defense areas. And for that to happen, it's clear that Europe has to become industrially competitive and economically strong, which is nearly impossible to do given its profound economic crisis and energy dependence on the United States. So, becoming more independent sounds more like political rhetoric than a tangible goal under Europe's current policies. What is your
Absolutely.
view? Yes, what is your view
Absolutely.
on this? Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. This is exactly more like posturing. But before we discuss the capacity of the Europeans to build this sort of independence or independent defense posture or economic posture, I'd like to focus again on what you began with, and that is Rubio's comments. Now, most commentators just focus on that part that is more conciliatory, that's not as confrontational as Vance's. Uh, I found his comments to be extremely confrontational in regard to Russia. Because what he said is that, come on, Europeans, don't you see we're putting sanctions on Russian oil, we're seizing Russian tankers, we forced, his words, we forced India to reject Russian oil. We're doing, and I think he mentioned Vance went to Armenia and signed some military contracts on the delivery of American war material. In other words, Rubio's comments are that the United States is doing just about everything that Biden was doing. The only difference is that the Europeans are paying and Americans are not. So this is not any revision of policy towards Russia. This is simply, a substitute of one payer by another one. The Europeans, you're going to pay, and we're going to continue squeeze Russia until it comes to the negotiating table. I love this expression, as if it's not there. Russia is at the negotiating table, and everybody knows what Russian conditions are. Now, say it openly. We don't accept Russian conditions, and we want them to change. But instead, they say to force Russia to the negotiating table. So this I found a kind of an eye-opener, because in a sense, Rubio was out of these negotiations. But if this is his position, I wonder if this is the official United States position, or is it Rubio's interpretation? But the facts speak for themselves. And let me go on a tangent here like this. Make America great again. Let's just fantasize. What does that mean? Uh, does that mean that what is called a unipolar moment, that is in the 90s when the United States was the only superpower, is this what Trump is dreaming of? Let me put it like this. Okay, we knocked out Venezuela. I'm thinking like the way Trump might say to his friends. We're going to knock out Cuba soon. We're going to force Iran to change, at least to change its policy. Maybe if we're lucky, going to change their government. Once we're done with that, we're going to control all the oil. Then the next thing we might try to do is regime change in Beijing, because we are tired of these communists. Let's put the government of Taiwan back in its place in Beijing so that they rule the Republic of China. Then there's no problem about, unification. It'll be unified without the communists. And after that, or maybe before that, we'll go and change government in Russia, put the Western-friendly oligarchs in power, and then they'll be just fine. There will be great Trumpist world with America great again. I think that's what he actually hoping for, maybe dreaming of I don't think that's possible. And now we come to the beginning of your question. Why is it not possible? And this is extremely important to understand and emphasize over and over and over again. The train has left the station. Neither the United States nor Europe is capable of challenging China in economic power and Russia in military power. This is it. They're afraid to face the reality. The Chinese economy is twice the size of the United States. Militarily, they are catching up with the latest equipment. Russian army, Russian missiles, hypersonic ones, can destroy the entire American fleet in minutes if they wanted to, but they don't want to. But the Americans are still acting as if they are this world hegemon like in the 1950s or 1990s. And that is, one Indian friend wrote to me that the United States it sort of looks like a former champion who still acts as if it is, but it's no longer. And Europe is even worse. And this is something we could have a separate program on. But European industry is collapsing. I looked at some of the figures. Germany has lost 20% of its industrial capacity since 2018. And this year, it's like 1% growth after 4 years of negative, of contraction and dismantling. And any growth is not in industry. It's all this other stuff, social services and whatnot. In other words, Europe, as I agree with Emmanuel Todd, the French ethnographer, Europe is in decline, not only economic, not only demographic, but also political and cultural. And therefore, dreams of some kind of European army or some kind of European independence, it's all this empty talk. It is physically impossible.
Do you feel that Europe is able to pursue its own political agenda in any shape or form? If, for example, let's say more right parties come to power, for example, if, let's say, AfD, Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, comes to power, or is this simply going to be Europe following the path that's defined for it by the United States of America from now on?
You see, I used to think, like until quite recently, that the trends in Europe are that the Eurosceptics are on the rise, that Alternative for Germany and Marine Le Pen's party in France and others are taking over. They're winning. But I begin to doubt that the European bureaucracy would allow them to do that. It seems to me that more and more indications are that the European Brussels bureaucracy, Führer von der Leyen, is on the course of centralization, of federalization. They continue talking about depriving nation states of their independent veto power, and always the same arguments coming. Europe will become more strong, Europe will be more integrated, blah, 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 speak with one voice. And so that seems to me that that is the trend. They would not allow AfD to win. In France, it's very easy to manipulate elections because you have essentially in France three segments. You have the centrists, which is Macron, and then you have the leftists, which is Mélenchon, and then you have the right, which is Marine Le Pen, nationalists. And as soon as one of the three, wins the first round, the other two can gang up and stop him. And this is what happened last elections. And this is very easy. That's the way the French system is designed, unless there is a real outrage, which is possible because France is in bad shape, changing governments. And Macron is only there because he cannot be ousted until 27. So, the trends, if the trends of democratic structures continued, then Europe is moving away from the centralist, Russia-phobic, stance, that would be, the development would be towards Europe as a common market rather than a common bureaucracy. In other words, they will still have common market, they would still have trade with various partners in a multi-central world, but there wouldn't be any kind of a veto power of any one country or group of countries. But that's only if they allow trends to develop, they develop. If they ban AfD, if they maneuver French elections in a year to an outcome that would be Macronism without Macron, then nothing will change. And the last comment on Europe, it seems to me that one cannot ignore the fact that Europeans are aware of it, that there's no such thing as one Europe. There's Northern Europe and there's Southern Europe. And the Northern Europe is extremely anti-Russian. It's Britain and Denmark and Finland and Poland and the Baltic countries, including Germany. They're just ardent to fight the Russians and get destroyed in the process. And then there's the Southern Europe and Central Europe, which is Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Austria, Greece, Italy, and to some extent Spain, that are definitely not in any way or shape or form eager for any confrontation for Russia. They are the ones who are just kind of nodding silently, but in fact, if you ask them, they would rather that there be no conflict, and if possible, there's trade and normal relations. So who knows what trend would prevail? The Southern Europeans with the skeptics in the North, or the North Europeans with a kind of a federalization and tightening controls. We shall see.
I really appreciate you pointing out the differences in Europe because I think here in the United States, we typically refer to Europe as a whole, right? We don't really distinguish between various national interests of the countries that comprise the EU and Europe more broadly. But in fact, the EU and Europe, it's a very fractured entity in terms of its interests, culture, social realities, economically as well. So it does appear that the project of the European Union or the project of the European Union is to consolidate power in Brussels at the expense of national interests and at the expense of the differences that that nations enjoy historically that they would like to have and would like to maintain. For example, Hungary is an excellent example of it, where not only did PM Orban took a stance against immigration policies of the EU, but also he's very much against the sort of foreign policy direction that the EU has assumed and really doesn't want to change. Now, I believe today, for the first time in Munich, both Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, and French President Macron brought up the topic of European nuclear deterrence in their speeches. And so that was quite shocking because given that the START treaty between the United States and Russia expired last week, and that was a very important agreement in terms of arms control and nuclear arms controls. So now we're hearing European leaders start discussing nuclear deterrence. So doesn't this indicate that the EU is now quite uncertain about the reliability of the United States nuclear umbrella? Or what is your view on Macron's and Merz's comments with regards to nuclear deterrence capabilities for their
Yes.
countries?
Yes, I think it's just posturing, and especially Macron, because Macron wants to be the leader of Europe. This is the role that he would prefer. And the only way where they could be superior to Germany is in nuclear field. Everybody knows that the French economy is way behind the German ones, and the German one is collapsing, and the French is collapsing too, but not as fast. And German factories are closing down, but at a slower rate. perhaps, than the just because they're not an industrial power. French exports is agriculture and articles of fashion and wine and cheese and all that sort of thing. But anyway, about the nuclear issue is that they certainly want to project that France is a nuclear power and the only one in the European Union, and it could expand its umbrella. All that is just empty talk, because specialists tell us that the French nuclear forces are minuscule. Now, of course, any nuclear bomb, can kill a lot of people, and so whether they're minuscule or not is not may seem like it's not so relevant. On the other hand, what matters is the delivery, is the satellites, is the guidance systems, is all kinds of things that go with it. So if you have a nuclear bomb from the 1950s, it would never make it to a target in modern times, because you have to have delivery system that could be intercepted, and it could be before it would fly any far away from France, it could be exploded over France. In other words, the French are so far behind the United States and Russia in nuclear field that I don't think it's possible within 10, 15 years ever to catch up. And you have to have lots of money to do that. This is not done quickly. This is not the stuff. If you kind of are behind, what are the chances you will catch up? It's virtually impossible, because there's always new stuff coming up all the time. So in terms of nuclear, the strongest country in the world is Russia. It has more nuclear weapons. It has hypersonic missiles that Americans have been trying very hard to deliver, but they haven't yet. So France is just laughable. When the Russian generals hear this, they think, okay, well, let's let them try. It's just nowhere close. But even that is not as important. What the Merz and Macron don't want to talk about is that I cannot imagine French officers serving under German officers and the other way around. The historical scars are deep and profound. I cannot imagine Polish officers taking orders from German officers. In other words, the dreams of a European army are just dreams. It cannot be done. The only thing that is conceivable is that you have, Polish units and German units, and they're all supposedly European army. Each has its own command, and each has its own tasks that are given by the Poles to the Poles, by the Germans to the Germans, but not by the Germans to the Poles or to the French. So that's the problem. That when Macron talks about European army, he says, one of his speeches was that the Finns could come up with 200,000, and the Poles with 200,000, and the Turks with 200,000. That's like La Grande Armée, 600,000. And then Napoleon or Macron would lead them in battle against wicked Russia. This is just daydreaming, because it's not going to happen, because it's impossible. And even if it were possible, Russian generals do actually, have plans in case of a big war in Europe to take care, to confront 800,000 army. And then again, I should know, we could talk about it for a long time, but I just mentioned that when Rutte talked about Russian advance in Ukraine at a snail's pace, what needs to be said in this regard is that it is only a snail's pace because the Russian army doesn't want to hurt the civilians, because these are citizens of Russia. Everybody who lives in Donbass is a Russian citizen by definition, because it's a part of the Russian Federation. So they're very, very careful. Even when they hit Kiev, yes, it's cold, and yes, it's difficult, it's miserable. But at the same time, if you look at the casualty figures, it's like 2 killed, 3 killed, terrible bombardment. Russia has hit with 500 drones. And then look at the casualty figures, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, if it were NATO, it wouldn't be 2, 3, or 5. It would be 200,000, 300,000, 400,000.
I was just going to Yep,
Yeah.
I was
So
just going
that's the
to
point.
comment on that. Yes, because I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what brings
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
what
go
you
ahead.
just reminded me is Yugoslavia, right? And not um, NATO's military campaign there, if I can call it that, or the shock and awe. So this is a completely different approach to a military conflict, and somehow the West has the nerve to sort of make it seem as though Russia can't unleash the same thing that they did to the civilian populations of those countries, whereas Russia is approaching it, as you mentioned, in a completely different manner.
Yes, like when the Russians bombed these electrical stations and power stations and even industrial facilities, uh, like in Kharkov, some plants, they're doing it at night. They're doing it to minimize civilian casualties, even of those workers who are there. Now, one could actually do it the other way around. If you wanted to maximize the number of casualties, you could do it during the daytime. You could actually have it without any warning. The Russians have completely, I mean, they haven't bombed Kiev. Uh, for months. You know, all these foreign delegations come there all the time, and they're not afraid because they know that that's really not their target. Their target is the infrastructure and foreign detachments. Those they have been trying to hit very hard, especially if there are known bases of foreign soldiers fighting in Ukraine. Then they hit those as fast as they can.
Yes, exactly. And so it is quite interesting to see the commentary coming from Western elites and Western military generals and so on and so forth, where they say, well, Russia is barely advancing. Well, there's nothing to be proud of when it comes to, the invasion of Iraq and the shock and awe and applauding the bombardment of the civilians there or Yugoslavia. And there are so many examples where civilians were regarded as collateral damage just to dismiss the brutality and the violence that was unleashed by NATO. Um, Now, German Chancellor Merz said something quite terrifying, and I think this deserves a separate discussion. And it is terrifying if we consider historic precedent. Merz said that he plans to make Bundeswehr the strongest army in Europe and that Russia must be exhausted economically and militarily. Now, that sounds very familiar. It sounds like we've been there before. It's as if the first two world wars taught Germany nothing at all. Professor John Mearsheimer actually argues that the United States acts as a pacifier in Europe, and without the US troops, European countries would pursue their national interest at each other's expense, and which would, of course, lead to a conflict. So, if the United States were to decrease its engagement in Europe and to sort of refocus on Asia and of course China and the Western Hemisphere, then it might potentially lead to a security competition between Germany and Russia, Germany, and possibly even Poland to a degree. So if Germany proceeds, as Merz suggests, security competition between Germany and Russia would likely lead to a military confrontation between NATO and Russia. Is Merz aware that his plans or his sort of direction is a direct path to war in Europe, or does he truly believe that um, making Bundeswehr the strongest army and making this war last longer than it has already is a path to peace?
Yes, yes, this is a great question. I actually, when you said everything you said, I only sit there and smile because I don't think that's possible. Whatever he says, this is not possible for several reasons. Number one is demography. The German nation is dying out. It's been replaced by a steady flow of immigrants from Turkey, Syria, and other countries. But moreover, the culture of German young people is very pacifist. They don't want to serve If they introduce draft, they're going to have a lot of young Germans just leave Germany because they don't want to be drafted. There's no desire whatsoever in the German public to militarize. They just don't want to. Even if there's the public opinion polls say, even if Russia attacked, they still don't want to. This is tremendous pacifism that I studied in Germany. I lived there, and it's not gone. It still is there. So physically, it's not possible. The second reason it's not possible is because France and German neighbors, Poland and France chiefly, would not allow it. They would simply not accept that Germany would try to build the biggest Bundeswehr in Europe. There's just got to be counterweights, and they politically would object to it, both France and Poland. Now, the third reason is that Germany is losing industrialization. You have to reverse it first. As I said, they've lost 20% of industrial capacity in less than 10 years. Now, first you have to bring it back to where it was, at least in 2018, and then to launch it on military buildup. This brings me in my mind another question that people are saying, well, the Russians did it, why can't we? And this is what my answer to this question is. The Russians did it because they had a huge military base of industrial enterprises from the Soviet Union. Because all the Soviet Union was doing in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s is building up military infrastructure. It didn't have consumer industry, but it was building rockets, and it was building tanks, and it was building heavy industry. And they were dormant in the 1990s. And they were sort of semi-dormant in the teens. But when Putin relaunched all those factories, and when the Ukraine war started, they started working round the clock. That's not that you cannot build them so quickly. It takes decades to build a military infrastructure, the factories, the supply chains, to produce more shells than all of NATO combined cannot be done in a year or two. You need 10. And you need a lot of billions to do that. And you need engineering cadres, you need universities, and you need all kinds of things in order you cannot switch it on just like that by magic. It takes years and years and billions and a national program which does not exist. So that's why I'm smiling. I think this is just empty words. This just cannot be done even if they wanted to. And if it can be done, it would take 10 years or more in order to be where they used to be. And now it's just sliding down.
Yes, and just to add to that, I think that the true way to handle the current fracturing of European security as a direct result of European policy or Western policies in general, but I would say that Russian President Putin already said that a war or any confrontation with NATO would not be handled in the same manner as Russia is handling the conflict in Ukraine. He did say that if NATO were to attack Russia, then there would not be anyone on their other side, meaning in Europe, to negotiate with soon after that. So it seems that the stakes are so high right now, and militarization is not the answer. We need diplomatic solutions. We don't need more tanks. And Ursula von der Leyen just called on European producers to switch to manufacturing tanks and artillery shells and other military weaponry. So it seems that Europe is set on a path that is moving away from any even possibility of a peaceful settlement.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just say one more thing about the military aspect of it. And that is that there are two things that are new, absolutely new, that came out after 2023 in the course of the Russian-Ukraine war. And these two things is that anything can be destroyed with minutes without nuclear. And that's very, very important. it's hard to even comprehend. There's anything at all, anywhere. Like, for example, there is this factory that will produce drones in Germany, somewhere in Schwarzwald, sort of hidden somewhere. Now, it can be destroyed in minutes by Oreshnik without any nuclear charge. That's the point. For example, like the decision is made in Ramstein that NATO is going to go to war against Russia. Well, in 5 minutes, there's no Ramstein without any nuclear. Just hit, gone. That's it. That's the reality. The second thing to understand is the drone revolution. Why Russian war goes so slowly? Well, it's because what the military say is this drone saturation, which means that for every live soldier that is just raises his head from the trenches, there's 10 drones waiting to kill him. This is why it's so slow. So that means the way the Russians are conducting the war, they've adjusted, and they're winning despite that. First of all, they're targeting drone operators. Then there's a surveillance from the air, from other drones. There are drones that guide other drones that survey the area, and then they suppress the drones. Then there's electrical means of suppressing the drones, and all kinds of ways in small groups of three, four, five, six. They are usually encircling a village, leave a chance for the Ukrainian troops to withdraw if they want to, and then trying to minimize the casualties. Once they surround it completely, they take it over. This is how they took Pokrovsk, and it took them 6 months. And the Western military specialists are saying, oh, it took the Russians almost a year to take Pokrovsk. Well, that's because they wanted to have it intact. If they acted like the Israelis in Gaza, there'd be nothing left of Pokrovsk, and then you have a rubble that you take over. No, it's a city. There's people there, and it's going to be restored as Mariupol was, and that is why it's so slow, because of the drones, because of the civilian casualties, and because the nature of warfare changed. These are the things that they don't seem to be aware. They speak as if it's 1980s.
One of the things that surprised me during the Munich Security Conference was a remark made by German foreign minister. He called on Europe to get closer to BRICS, of all things, and he said it's wrong for Europe to alienate itself from BRICS countries. He said we have a lot in common with countries like India, Brazil. Why not focus on those? And he referred to this as, quote unquote, the new view. So it is quite stunning, I think, to hear that, because this must be a very unpopular opinion among European politicians who still view themselves as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle. So is this an example, is German foreign minister's commentary, is this an example of sort of you can't beat them, so join them? Or is Europe just sort of trying to give this engagement a try because it sees itself as a Trojan horse that seeks to sort of destroy the rise of the global majority?
Yeah, these are all wonderful questions, Lena, but there's probably a little bit of all of those. But if we look at the statistics of trade, Europe depends on imports from Asia just as the United States does. United States still, with all this Trumpism, still imports 500 billion from China. It diminished a little bit, but it still does. Now, Europe, the same thing too. They import from China, from Indonesia, from India. So now they're trying to diversify. So this free trade with India, you know more about it than I do, in my opinion, is just an attempt to diversify their Asian imports, which they need desperately. And it's also an attempt to sort of bypass their isolation from on Russia on the one side, United States on the other side. So you make an opening to those that are still available, such as Latin America and India. But those two actually go counter to what Trump wants, because free trade with Latin America would undercut Trump's claim that the Western Hemisphere is exclusively for the United States to exploit. Europeans, if they have a free trade with Latin America would much rather sell it to the Europeans than to Americans because they don't have to pay any tariffs. Same thing with India. Uh, what in practice it could mean is that India buys Russian oil and has a free trade agreement and sells it free without any tariffs to the Europeans. So it's a win-win for everybody. The Europeans buy it from India, not from Russia. Russia sells it to India. India makes money, sells it to European. Everybody's happy. And that's a way to present it as if they freed themselves from Russian oil and Russian gas. Here's the reality. The reality is that Europe cannot survive without Russian oil. They buy it in a variety of ways and others. It's simply because it's cheaper, not because it's any better or whatever. It's just cheaper because Russia is closer and because Russian labor costs are cheaper than any other, than the American one or the European ones. So if Europe wants to remain a secondary, I'm not talking the first, the secondary industrial power in the world, it has to buy cheap energy. It has to have good education, which it still does. It's okay. Produce engineers and restore its industry. The way things are going now doesn't look like they're capable of doing it. It might, there's still a chance if they do the right things, they might be still able to. But what the Ursula von der Leyen's policy is exactly the opposite. That's why the Russians are saying they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're making it worse for themselves. And the data I quoted many times in today's show speaks for itself. 20% reduction in industrial capacity of every one of those. I checked France, I checked Italy, I checked England. Overall, all of them are declining, only at a different rate, but it still is declining. So that's the reality. Listen, I repeat over and over all the time, we are in a historical change of a paradigm. For the first time in 500 years, Europe is no longer the center of the universe. It has shifted first to the United States, and now it's not shifting, it has already shifted to Asia, to China, India, Indonesia. These are the big three in the Asian theater. That's where industrial capacity is moving, and also know-how and innovation and robotics and microchips and you name it. They are already the leader in many of those fields. Now, I had a show, had a program in my channel about a month ago. And what I found, comparing United States and China, what I found is my listeners don't like it. They don't like to listen to reality because it's very painful to realize that the United States, the mightiest country in the world on paper, is no longer that. The train has left the station. It's only a matter of who, when they're going to realize it, that both the United States and Europe are in decline. And as Emmanuel Todd puts it, in terminal decline. I wouldn't say terminal, but definitely in decline. Russia is gaining more from China and right now. And this is one of the good reasons why it has absolutely no interest in attacking Europe. What is there in Europe? There's nothing there. What is there? Resources? What? Territory? Russia has plenty of territory. What? There's absolutely nothing Russia is interested in Europe, unlike in previous times. This is why, one has to realize it's a historical shift. Again, what I said in one of my videos, for the first time in 300 years since Peter the Great, Russia is not interested in Europe anymore because there's nothing there for them. Because anything that it needs is in the East. Trade, resources, know-how, development. That's incredible. That's new.
Vlad, and maybe the last question for today, although I would love to continue this discussion, I think it's quite fascinating. So the conflict in Ukraine. Zelensky spoke at the conference and he sort of repeated the same script that we've heard from him many times before. He even allowed himself an ad hominem attack at PM Orban. What's truly shocking is that amid these discussions of European security that lasted for a couple of days, the EU still has no peace plan grounded in reality, grounded in the actual realities on the ground. And on the contrary, as you mentioned in the very beginning of this program, Denmark's PM wants NATO to reject red lines and she demands deep strikes into Russia. So we're still in the same spot that we were several years ago. What does this year's Munich Security Conference and the political elites commentary, what does all of this mean for the conflict in Ukraine, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, Zelensky, I smile when I watch him. You know, Zelensky is an actor. And just recently, just for fun of it, I watched his Quartal 95 comedy show. It's available. He speaks perfect Russian. And one of the jokes on that program was that Zelensky had to learn two foreign languages, one English, the other Ukrainian, because both are foreign. Anyway, he's an actor. He loves, I know he enjoys all these meetings and handshakes and sitting with the powerful leaders of Europe and America. And he just absolutely loves it. But the result is that what he says, give us this, give us this, give us this, defend us, we're the champions, we're the front against the Russians, give us more money, give us more reconstruction, give us, give us, give us, give us. And the result is, what do they give him? They're giving him 15 billion per year. This year and 15 billion next year. And then there's some other programs to support his regime here and there. Now, how much of that would be stolen, we don't know, because a lot is being stolen all the time. But that's not enough. To sustain Ukraine, I believe I read somewhere, needs 10 billion a month for all its purposes. Now, 15 a year is nothing. So the United States is not going to spend any more money on it. But this is the only positive for the Russian point of view of Trump's administration, is that it's no longer pouring billions into it. And so it's just not a question of when, of whether, it's a question of when Ukraine will surrender. Now, what is the most stupid thing for Zelensky to do is to do what he's doing. Because today he still has a chance to save two-thirds of Ukraine in a more or less sort of independent status, in a sense that it's not occupied by the Russians, in a sense that it still has a chance eventually to join the European Union. All he has to do is to sign no NATO, no foreign troops, restore Russian language and Russian and church rights. That's it. If he signs that, okay, you're fine, but he doesn't want to. And why doesn't he want to? He doesn't want to because he's afraid of the nationalists. And I mentioned it in my previous video that there was a conference of Banderovites, which is called 13th Annual Bandera Readings. And it had all these speeches of how they hate the Russians and how they will not yield an inch. And one of the most damaging things, or I would say dangerous or disturbing, was when you read the speeches about de-Russification. And that's what they want to do with the Russian population in Donbass if they ever were to conquer it. It's basically ethnic cleansing, and they're saying it openly. In other words, Zelensky is afraid that if he agrees to surrender of anything to the Russians, he will be removed. And they would put in power somebody who is willing to fight to the end, to the last Ukrainian. They don't care. Just like Hitler didn't care how many Hitlerjugend would die in defending his Reich, he didn't care that as long as he could preserve himself and his regime, until the bitter end that he had to commit suicide. Well, Zelensky, similarly, he is afraid to admit defeat, because as Aristovich put it, this is his former collaborator, and now a critic. He said that if he does that, then immediately the question would, why didn't you do it earlier? What for did we lose 1 million Ukrainians if we have to sign it now? We could have done it in 2022 and kept Donbass as part of Ukraine. So what the Europeans are doing is making it more difficult. In fact, they're ruining Ukraine. By encouraging Ukraine to fight, they are actually destroying Ukraine. The only thing that Ukraine needs now is to agree to peace right now. But they're not doing it, and by not doing it, they're dooming Ukraine to full destruction and unconditional surrender. Moreover, and again, I made a video of it, we can talk about it again. There's opposition in Russia too. There are more and more people openly saying, in supposedly dictatorial system of Putin, that that's not good enough. The 4 provinces are not good enough. We have there's almost 150,000 Russian soldiers died, not in order for the rest of Ukraine to join EU, which is inseparably different, not different at all from NATO. So they're saying, no, 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 no. We have to have Odessa, we have to have a Kharkov, that's the minimum. And the rest of Ukraine has to be a neutral, and we have to be sure that it would never join NATO and there'd be no French troops there. So this is what the stakes are now higher. And it would be difficult even for Putin to enforce sort of limited goals, which the Europeans call maximalist. They're not maximalist. Maximalist is total surrender of Zelensky regime and denazification, meaning that all these Banderovites go to jail. So that's where we are. Zelensky's celebrating his wonderful time with all these world leaders who keep encouraging to fight, but the fight is actually ruining Ukraine and Ukrainian people. And that's very sad, because in the end, I wish that Ukraine and Russia live in peace as two brothers could.
Vlad, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to having you on the program again for a new episode.
Thank you very much, Lena. Thank you very much.